Hey guys, this is Justin. This is my presentation on XML HTTP requests to consume a JSON service. This is also called an AJAX. Now AJAX stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. It is a technique for creating better, faster, and more interactive web applications with the help of XML, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. AJAX uses XHTML for content, CSS for presentation, and JavaScript for dynamic content display. We're going to be illustrating the usefulness in JavaScript for dynamic content. Now with AJAX, you can update a web page without reloading the entire page. You can request data from a server, receive data from the server, and send data to the server, all without having to reload the web page. This was not possible in the past, but with AJAX you can do this. I will not be demonstrating sending data to the server because it requires the appropriate PHP code, and I believe that will be beyond the scope of this course. In this tutorial, I will be demonstrating how to set up a connection to your server and how to use this to create a more dynamic web page. So let's go to my website and we'll take a look at what I've got going there. Now if you look at this, we have some simple objects that are stored on the server. And now these are stored on the server in a text file as an array, and this code is retrieving that information using JSON to parse it to an object in JavaScript and then displaying the properties of each object. So if we look here, we can request a dog, we can request boat, and we'll get some details on it. Now you can do this fairly simply using JavaScript, however that's not what's happening here. The code is actually requesting this information from the server and bringing it back in real time, and it's not reloading the web page to do it. Another example of a dynamic application of AJAX is this bottom example here. Now we can change this box, and you see the text here changing dynamically as I select the item. Now this involves some PHP code which I had some outside help with. However, what is happening here in this example is it is using AJAX to contact the server. The server is processing the request and it is sending back the results based on what I select. And this is repeated in code consistently so that it updates it every second or so. So we'll go through the code to show you how to do that. So to get our code started, what we're going to want to do is to create a new XML HTTP request. Now this is the same thing as an AJAX object. So what we're going to do is create a new variable, call it XHTTP. Notice I'm making it a global variable outside of a function. New HTTP request. That is going to create a new object that will allow us to utilize that variable to contact the server. Now let's go to W3 Schools and we'll take a look at some of the methods and properties within this. So this is our object. That's what we're going to use that contains all the below methods and properties. The ones we're going to be using is open. That's one of them. Now it takes parameters. The first one is a method. There are two methods. One is get and post. Now they're both very similar, however post has some advantages whereas get does not. Post has an unlimited data that you can transfer, get does not. And so if you're transferring a lot of data, you're going to want to use post. The second parameter is the URL. That is a string. You need to put into your parameter the location of the file you're trying to retrieve. And then synchronous or asynchronous. Now for the most part you're just going to want to do asynchronous, so you'll put in that last parameter there true. I wouldn't worry too much about synchronous. The difference is that with asynchronous you can move on in your code without having to wait for a response from the server, whereas synchronous is that it will wait until the server has responded before moving on to the next code. And now you typically don't need to worry about the username and password, so you just leave those, don't put in those parameters. If you have that set up on your server, you will need those, but for this example, I do not. Send method is going to send the request to the server. Send with string is what you would do if you were using a post, but we're not going to do that this time. Now here are some properties. When the system is ready to communicate with the server, the property onReadyStateChange is going to monitor when the communication is complete and is going to execute this property when that is done. So if you look at ready state property, these have some numbers associated with them. When that property changes to one of those numbers, or you're checking to see if that property is currently one of those numbers, you are checking for these conditions. We will be checking to see if the server connection is established and if the request is finished and response is ready. Now when we retrieve information from the server, we can retrieve it in several different ways. One of those is response text. That is a property. Whatever comes back from the server will be ported over to a string within this property. If we're utilizing a XML file, we can use this property and it will contain the response from the server in an XML format. Now the status is another property that monitors the condition. And status text, we will not be using that in this demonstration. So now that we have an idea of what the methods and properties are of this object that we just created, let's go ahead and implement some code. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is create a local instance of the XML HTTP request. And I'm doing this because it will be helpful in our implementation in the function. Okay, so next we're going to define what to do with a successful response with the server. So we're going to utilize the new instance object, XML HTTP .onReadyStateChange. Remember, this is going to be executed whenever the connection to the server is successful and ready. So we're going to put a function in this. We're going to use an if statement. And we're going to look for the property ready state to be equal to 4, meaning it's ready, and that the status is equal to 200, and that means that it is not currently communicating with the server. Now we need to create when we receive the response from the server, we need to convert it to something that can be used. So we're going to use a JSON here. Create a new variable, response, and JSON.parse. We want to use the keyword this because we're referring to a property within this scope. And now we want to call another function after this. So let's go down here and create another function. We're going to create a function to handle manual object response, and then put in a parameter of response. So we have the function there, handle manual object response. Now let's go up here and call that method. And put in our variable so that it will call this function down here when the communication is completed. Now the response text here, if you remember, that is a property of our object, of the AJAX object, and whatever is retrieved from the server will be put into that property as a string. So that's why we're parsing it to make it a JavaScript object. Now I have tried multiple ways of getting this value, the response text property, out of there, and I cannot figure out any other way. You can't put return this.response text That doesn't work. You can do something like document.write. That would work. But the best way, and every discussion forum that I've looked at, the best way to get response text property out of this method is to call another function with it and handle it. That's why this function is called handle response. Alright, so now that we have a response ready for when the server responds and we know what to do with it, we're going to continue on with this function. We're going to gather resource based on selection chosen by user. So let's create a variable input, and this is basically going to get the value that we put in here. So we're going to make input equal to document element by ID. Now it'll give us our value. Now we are going to use the open method within the object to set up the connection. So XML http.open, and then later on we're going to do XML http.send. Now open does not mean what it sounds like. You are not creating a connection, an open connection to the server. This is just setting the properties for the connection to be made. The sent method here is what actually makes the connection. So we need to put in some parameters here. We're going to put get, remember there's either get or prompt, or post, excuse me. And we need to define the directory. In my case that is modules, JavaScript, object, strings. And then we need to input what the user selected. So to do that, we're going to concatenate, so plus input.txt, and that will refer to whatever file we select in there. We need to add one more parameter, and that is true or false to say asynchronous or synchronously. We're going to put true because we want to do asynchronously, and that will set up our connection. Now I want to show you the arrays that I've already put onto the server. Over here, under my object strings directory, I have these several objects here. If you look at this example, it is a very simple array. It is in a string, and it is a text file, .txt. Those are already on the server. I could add more properties to this. I could do all of that to retrieve this information, but we're just going to keep it at 3 to keep it simple. Make sure that when you are creating these string versions of arrays and objects that you keep the formatting correct, or else JSON will not be able to parse or stringify it correctly. And one note about JSON, I found that when you stringify an object that has methods in it, it will strip away the methods and leave you only the properties, so that when you parse it again, you'll only have the properties of that object. So that's a note, and very important if you're trying to do something like store an object and preserve its methods. It won't work using stringify. Okay, so I've got these files up on the server. They're already there. They already have information in them. We need to add more to this second function, which remember is going to be called after the communication with the server is complete. We're going to pass the response text to this other function. So let's create a output variable,